In this lecture, I will begin the Bronze Age and talk about the early Bronze Age in the Cyclades, the islands in the center of the map here. We will also, in later lectures, talk about the Bronze Age on the mainland, which is the Helladic periods, and then on the island of Crete, which we call the Minoan culture. I should have said the Helladic culture and the Cycladic culture. Now, the advent of the Bronze Age is very important because with metallurgy, we see several things occur. And the main thing is craft specialization. That's the idea that you can live by producing one thing and then use that to go to a market that say and trade that thing like a metal dagger as shown here on the left for food. Prior to this, in the Neolithic, people were subsistence farmers. That is to say, they grew everything they needed to stay alive. With the Bronze Age, we start seeing craft specialization and cash cropping. So let's say you grow wheat, you take that to the market, and you trade that wheat for everything else. But the important thing is that you have a market to take it, because unlike our wheat farmer, our metallurgist cannot eat his product. He has to be able to exchange it for food. Now, why does metal indicate craft specialization? Well, first of all, it's very time intensive, and also requires long distance trade networks. So, the first of all, you need copper and tin to make bronze. Now, copper is not that hard to find in the Eastern Mediterranean, but tin is, and the closest sources that we know of are either Afghanistan or England, and so there's some long distance trade routes bringing tin in. And then if it's in the core, like for example, especially in the copper, you have to be able to smelt it, and smelting is the process by which you melt the stone, literally itself, or the ore, and on top of that will float the copper and tin, and then you mix them in appropriate amounts, and it creates a bronze. It creates bronze, and bronze is stronger than copper by itself, and makes for better weapons, etc. In any case, a craft specialist will spend all of his time doing this, and so he or she will have to take that to a market and exchange it. And so we're used to this idea of the life we live. We're all specialists. Obviously I specialize in education. You guys, and this is so important in our society that at the age of 18 to 22, you're still learning a trade for yourself. That's how highly specialized things are. Now, with a craft specialization, also requires urbanization, or it happens here because you need things like markets, and you also need people not only who will do the trading at the markets, but people below them who could work the fields or help out with the trader, and the people above it who monitor the market system in and of itself, who says what prices can be, etc. And along with that comes social stratification. And social stratification is the idea that some people live on top, some people live in the middle, some people live on the bottom. But that's also reflected in the urbanization of what sort of buildings people live in. And also, we start seeing public monuments like religious centers and palaces, big houses, small houses, nice graves, not so nice graves, etc. And here is a slide that gives you an idea of how this works. Here is this is based on Egyptians here, but you can see there's the pharaoh on top, and then the priests below that, and then the scribes, and et cetera, et cetera. And it goes down to people working, the herders working with their animals. This is a society that we're very familiar with and we take for granted. But it's interesting in the fact that, prior to this period, this really didn't exist. We lived in what were called egalitarian societies. That is to say that there was no formal structure for our government. there was, obviously, if there was times of need or stress, people would come together and figure things out. But in general, it wasn't like, we have institutionalized hierarchies like our government to rule things. And this is what we're going to live in from this time forward. Now back to the Cyclades. Here we can see where the Cyclades are in relationship to the mainland, just so to remind you of that. And here's a close-up of them with some of the Cyclades that are very important. We will talk later in the class a lot about this island of Santorini or Thera. And I've mentioned before, but we'll talk a little bit right now about the island of Milos. Now, interestingly enough, these are all volcanic islands on the bottom here. And these center areas here are where the crater has been blown out by volcanic eruptions and inundated with water. This is the bottom of we're getting close to the bottom of the European tectonic plate on the southern part of Crete. It hits Africa. In any case, those volcanoes are important, as we'll see, for a couple reasons. But for right now, on Milos, they produce the obsidian, which I had mentioned before. This is a wonderful glassy stone that's produced from lava that is chilled very quickly. Not every volcano produces it. Some produce it, but it's not good enough to make tools from. Milos, however, made great tools. And as you can see, the center here, there's these wonderful blades that you could use to cut things. And then there's the cores on the left and the right where they were napped off, where there was a striking on the top of the core, and what came off were these blades. So we see a lot of trade in that, and when we find obsidian on the mainland or on Crete, we know it had to come from the Cyclades. And we also start seeing fortified settlements like the site of Halandriani, which not only has a settlement here, but has these bastions here. These are the foundations for bastions that overlook a cliff. So our architecture is going to change somewhat in this period. And as we'll see, it develops into more complexity as we go through time. And we have our bronze artifacts. Don't bother about the tombs on the left here, but we see some fish hooks on the second from the left, and most importantly, we see daggers here. In the center, they are missing their handles, but you can see the holes on the top where they would have been attached to a handle. These are personal daggers that were carried around, and we'll see them in figurines. And we see a nice saw here. And these are found quite commonly, believe it or not. So used for cutting down trees or what have you. But in any case, metal implements are obviously superior to stone ones in many ways. So we'll see more of these as we go through the rest of the semester, but they begin now. And we also get this exciting thing called frying pans in the Cyclades. And they're given that name simply because of the shape. The one on the right still has its handle. The one on the left doesn't anymore. Their function is unclear, but I'll come back to that idea in a moment. But these are the bottom of these frying pans. And we can see on the right there's just abstract design of hatching of lines. But here we see fish going around the outside. In the center, we see a starburst, the sun. And then we see connected spirals. And we believe that represents the water, which makes sense for the Cycladic islands. As we move along, here's another frying pan. This one's from the island of Syros, and we can just see the nice decoration of it on the starburst around the circle in the center. Frequently on the handle right here, there will be a female, the pubis area of a female. And so we think they might be associated with women's products. And indeed, we see now on the other side how they can be filled in with water and how shallow the water is. And we think that perhaps it was used as a mirror. Now here's a very famous Syros frying pan, which has our has our spirals here indicating water, but it also has this very, very long boat, and indeed they're called long boats. And we see these lines coming off the bottom and the top, and they represent the oars. And notice how many oars there are. So they can, there must have been great social organization with these in order to get the oarsmen, practiced and in time in order to row this boat. It seems a bigger boat than would just be used, let's say, for fishing, and probably represents some type of wartime boat. And once again, we see the female pubis area on the bottom here. So it's an exciting thing where we see this idea of different types of ships, which makes sense for the Cyclades, but ones that indicate high social organization and perhaps warships. Another very famous piece from the Cyclades is from the island of Milos, and it's this little stone box. Okay, it's not that very large. It's just about a foot in each direction, and it has little legs here or stilts. And what's interesting is it has these containers here with an entrance, door entrance, and what these represent are silos for a granary, and we see a drawing of it here, and it gives us an idea of what the real granaries look like. Where first of all they are lifted above ground so the air could get underneath and there weren't vermin and insects getting into the grain, which you obviously don't want. And they're separated into units. It could be just because they have different things in them, but also because when you use these granaries, you want them to be anaerobic. That is to say, no air inside, because once you have air inside, a little bit of moisture, they'll start sprouting. So you keep them separate, so you only have to commit yourself to one, so much at a time. When you open up the silo, you're not committing yourself to all of the grain, but just portions of it. And once again, we have our interconnected spirals here, a very common decoration in the Cyclades. This is a very important piece, and I want you to know about it because what we think was probably used for was a woman's, makeup, basically. But it's shaped like a little granary, and that gives us an idea of what real granaries look like. And they also show social organization. People were not just storing their own granary, but this looks like a big public one. We will also get these pixies, as we see here on the left. This just has an abstract, nice geometric design on it. But I introduce them to you here because we're going to see this shape a fair bit. These are small, only a few inches wide and up, and contain precious items, we believe, since they're so small, and for a good chance used for women's cosmetics. So just get used to that shape. Now, the very famous thing from the Cyclades are these what are called Cycladic figurines. And these became really big items in the early 20th century and influenced a lot of modern art. And so what we see looking on the one on the left here is we see a female, we see the pubic triangle here, her breasts, and then her arms crossed across, her stomach. These are called folded arm figurines. And then a very stylized face, this triangular face with just the nose. But we do know from traces of paint that these were painted, so the rest of the face was done. And what's interesting about these figurines is that each Cycladic island had their own style. So there's a common theme of, Cycladic figurines, perhaps they represent a deity of some sort, but they each made it into their own style. Just like, for example, you can go across different Catholic countries, and the representative of, say, the Virgin Mary changes from culture to culture, although they are all, Christians. And notice this one's particularly flat. We have this type here, which same idea, but it's more corpulent, and the knees bend. Notice the important thing is that they stand on their toes. So these could not stand on their own. So they're most likely held. Now, some of them are small little figurines you can hold in your hand, but others are almost life-size. They're quite tall. And it repeats over and over and over for about 1,000 years. And so these are really important in their culture and have really hit the aesthetic of modern artists for the sort of simplified human forms. But I want you to pay attention to these Cycladic figurines. This is something you're really going to need to know. And let's just look at some other ones here. You can see the one on the left here, the eyes are sort of carved out, so you can see it there. The arms are missing, but notice her right leg on the left side here. Notice the hole in it. Now, what happened there is the leg broke off, and that's a mending hole to tie the rest of the leg back on, which is quite an interesting fact about these. And once again, we see another style here. I'm not going to make you know each, what each island's style is. You can see the faces are a bit more ovate here than they were with the triangular one. So these slight variations, but based on the great theme of Cycladic figurines. Trust me, now that you know about these things, you're going to see them everywhere. They're very, very, very popular, and they get incorporated into modern art a fair bit. Here's another example as well. I don't know if you can make out, but on the face on the left, you can see some traces of paint here, lines across the face as if perhaps tattoos, larger breasts, folded arms once again. On the right, we see the profile of it. It has a flat head here. The body is not as bent here, but the nice prominent long nose, so typical and of the Cycladic figurines. And also, this is how they want to represent the human form. And indeed, this is good marble made from local marble in the Cyclades. And so it could be nice and white, and it could be painted many, many colors. And so it is quite a good canvas in order to make figurines. Some are just of heads here, so I show you these, and we talked about sort of the more ovate or squarish heads on the left. It even has a little bit of a mouth left there, or once again, these triangular ones. But I just want to point out the variations on a theme, and islands have different ones. We also have what are called violin figurines here, just highly stylized, pubic triangles. The head is just a stick. We're not sure what these are for, but these are also quite common and also made out of the local marble. Now, one of the famous pieces are these harpists. And these are males that are seated with a belt, and they're playing some sort of harp. And perhaps we have our earliest representation of a bard, that is to say, somebody who plays music and then sings a poem to people, like we see in Homer, right? Because the Iliad and the Odyssey were actually poems that were sung. The head is tilted back. We see the nice ear on it, and perhaps that's what we're getting a reference to here. One interesting thing is that males are the only ones shown seated or playing these. And one last final one, another harp player here. The head is a bit different. The harp isn't too much, but obviously they like the music of their culture. And we will end there.